How's it going, everyone? Grim here with another video. This time I want to give another of my two shiny pennies on the hot topic of Warhammer 40k 10th edition. As I've already mentioned in a previous video, Games Workshop has been spoon feeding us tidbits of information on how 10th differs from 9th, and some of those morsels are tasty. Today specifically, let's talk about transports in 10th edition. This is the Warhammer Community website's article dated 19 April 2023 on the upcoming 10th edition rules for transports. Dubbed the New 40k, Games Workshop is doing a great marketing campaign for and capitalizing on the advent of 10th edition. There is a slew of articles on Warhammer Community thus far, and more are being published on the various aspects of the tabletop game and what changes we should all expect for the new 40k. As it reads, transports are the fast and flexible way to travel the new edition in style. Now that you know how much tougher vehicles will be in the new edition of Warhammer 40,000, you can start planning which units you're going to stuff into them. And there's a great picture of a repulsor with Space Wolves Primaris Marines, maybe intercessors in front of it, a Howl Doggy Chaplain in front of them. In the background, a bunch of Space Wolf Terminators spewing out the forward ramp of a Land Raider, all engaging some Thousand Sun Rubric Marines. This is a great picture. Very nice paint job on all the models, but it's not really game accurate. As we all know, if this was an actual 40,000 game, the T-Suns would have smited those vehicles to oblivion by now. And then, if there were any Wolf Boys that survived the vehicle explosions, they would immediately get crispy from the Rubric Warp Flamers. All kidding aside, this is a great picture. The article continues with explaining some special new rules for transports. Units can now disembark after the transport has moved. It never did make sense to me why units couldn't do that in 9th edition. There's a snippet on the new firing deck rule. Harlequin players know this all too well, but for the rest of you uninitiated, basically, units embarked on a transport that has the firing deck ability can use their weapons to shoot while still embarked in the vehicle. There are some limitations that are explained. Not all units, not all models in units, just X number of models can shoot one weapon each. So, firing deck 2 means 2 models embarked in the transport can shoot one weapon each, in addition to the transport itself shooting its weapons. This is a very cool new rule and makes perfect sense lore-wise and game-wise too. As an example, in 9th edition, an Astra Militarum Chimera transport had its own weapons and the ability to shoot 6 lasguns, so long as there was at least one unit embarked in the transport. This was to simulate a squad of troops shooting their lasguns out of the gun ports of the vehicle, of which the Chimera has 6, so 6 shots. Makes sense lore-wise, but not so much game-wise in my opinion. Game-wise, the rules were that even a one-model unit could trigger this ability, because as long as there was a unit in the transport, you could use it. How can one person shoot 6 lasguns? Anyway, if 9th edition gives the Chimera firing deck 6, then 6 of the troops can shoot, which means you have to have 6 models, a unit with at least 6 models. If your unit has 5, even though it says firing deck 6, you can only shoot 5 of those weapons. Makes sense. Next, we have confirmation that these firing deck weapons are considered part of the transport itself. So those 6 lasguns from those 6 troops are actually 6 lasguns from the transport. Buffs and auras that affect the transport also affect those firing deck weapons. The example given is the Orc Mechaniac that buffs a vehicle's weapons hit roll. It now buffs the firing deck weapons too. So here's the Chimera example again. You have 10 Cadian troops in a Chimera. The Chimera has its own weapons that it can shoot. 6 of those 10, if the Chimera has firing deck 6, 6 of those 10 troops could shoot, and those 6 las guns and all the weapons that the Chimera itself has will be, quote unquote, blessed by an aura that might be impacting the transport. But as soon as those troops disembark, they are now separate from the transport, and their las guns are not impacted by an aura that affects the transport. Going back to the new rule where units can disembark after their transport has moved, the article talks about how certain transports can do so even after they've advanced. So, new general rule in 10th edition is that units can disembark immediately after their transport has moved on that same turn in that same move phase, but not if their transport advanced or fell back. Special rule for impulsors and Taroks is that they can do it even after advancing, because these vehicles have the rapid deployment ability. That's pretty cool. Land Raiders have another special rule called Assault Ramp, where units that disembark immediately after the Land Raider has moved can also charge this turn. This would suggest that the 10th is keeping the current rule about disembarking where units would normally not be able to charge in the same turn they disembarked. Assault ramp transports are the exception. They can charge. Okay, so I want to read verbatim this part of the article above the nice little picture of the repulsor. Minus a couple of exceptions, Space Marine transports no longer care whether a Primaris unit is riding in the back or not. The example given is the repulsor's new rules. In 9th, the repulsor is for Primaris only. Firstborn cannot ride. In 10th, looks like so long as you're Adeptus Astartes, you've got a ticket to ride. It doesn't matter if you're a Firstborn Adeptus Astartes or a Primaris Adeptus Astartes. You're good to go. That's cool. The 40k community is absolutely loving this new rule. Players are eating this up like an eclair. Nom 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 nom. The consensus is that we no longer have to worry about Primaris versus Firstborn when it comes to rides. You know, in 9th edition, each transport had specific rules on whether it would take a Primaris. A drop pod, for example, cannot take a Primaris. An impulsor only takes Primaris. This Warhammer Community article makes it seem that that will no longer be an issue. That we'll be able to put Primaris into drop pods, rhinos, razorbacks, etc. This is great, right? Don't you think this is fantastic news? I don't know. I'm a little skeptical. I think this has the potential to be bad. Bad, bad, bad. Let me explain my crazy thinking process with an example. The rhino. At face value, this new rule makes it seem like you'll be able to finally use your rhino with your assault intercessors. 10 intercessors, an entire squad neatly wrapped in a cheap, tough rhino. Move them up the battlefield into melee range and throw them out right after the movement, and bam, ready to rock and roll. However, the pessimist in me is focused on the first words of the quote, minus a couple of exceptions. A couple of exceptions can mean different things to different people. A couple, as in only 2 transports, have an exception to this general rule, this cool new 10th edition rule about Primaris versus Firstborn in transports? Or does a couple mean any transports that GW want to have this exception are going to have this exception to the rule? Furthermore, look at how the description of the repulsor's new rule is written. No longer Primaris only, but there's a bunch of size restrictions. So that means every transport can and probably will have restrictions that pertain to that specific transport. I can easily see the description of the Rhino's new rule being something like, this model has a transport capacity of 5 Adeptus Astartes infantry models. In 9th edition, it's 10 infantry models. In 10th, it could easily be 5. Fuzzy logic might support a lower capacity, seeing as how Primaris are physically bigger than Firstborn, so they might take up twice as much space. You know, they got them broader shoulders that you got to deal with when sitting side by side. Where 10 Firstborn may have sat, only 5 Primaris can sit. But any Astartes, Primaris or Firstborn, it doesn't matter. Only 5 fit now. As an example, you'll have to buy double the amount of rhinos. Or this could mean that the new Primaris versus Firstborn rule about transports makes the distinction between the two completely moot. Maybe because GW will make all Firstborn units fade into Legends. You won't be able to play them anymore. And that means you'll have to buy new Primaris models to replace your old Firstborn ones that will no longer be legal. In my opinion, that would kind of suck. The article continues with explaining a new rule called Mobile Command Vehicle. You can turn any transport that has the Mobile Command Vehicle rule into an officer or character leader type unit. The example shown is of a Chimera being a Mobile Command Vehicle. But 10th will probably make it so that transports in all other factions can do this. Well, certain transports in all other factions will be able to do this as well, not just Astra Militarum. The article ends with giving us a final new rule called Fire Support. Basically, if a transport kicked out any units this turn and then fired on the enemy, that unit can also fire on the same enemy, only one enemy unit, with a reroll to wound. This is great, absolutely powerful, game-changing in my opinion. Picture it, my Chimeras all have one officer unit and one 10-mad squad unit embarked, if the size capacity restrictions remain the same from 9 to 10. In the command phase, the officer is given order to shoot twice using the Mobile Command Vehicle rule. In the movement phase, they advance up the battlefield like a blitz into rifle range, and a squad disembarks from each Chimera using the Rapid Deployment rule. In the shooting phase, each Chimera shoots the same high-value target of my opponent, all of them focusing on that one unit. Then each squad that jumped out of those Chimeras does the same thing, firing twice, and gets to reroll their wound rolls using the Fire Support rule. The troops alone are like 60 last shots, with 10 auto wounding, and then maybe another 20 hitting. If you look, in terms of the odds of the dice roll, of those 20 that do hit, 7 wound, and then you reroll the 13 that don't wound, and of those, 4 rerolls do wound. So then that's like 21 wounds from 30 Imperial Guardsmen. And that's only from the troops. We didn't even consider the Chimera's weapons and what they're packing. Of course, it would be insane for GW to give a Chimera all 3 of these special abilities. But my example is exaggerated. However, it does emphasize the new rules and how they can impact the game. Can be very, very powerful in my opinion. Those reroll to wounds are no joke. But what are your thoughts? Is my pessimism too extreme? Is this merely the mad rant of someone who's too grim and too dark, or is there a flicker of truth to what I'm saying? Leave a comment, because sharing is caring. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. If you didn't like it, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Thank you again for joining me. Grim out.